The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones outside Buckingham Palace, as tourists began gathering for the changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Chen, a 28-year-old travel blogger from California, adjusting his camera settings and sipping from a paper cup of Earl Grey tea he'd purchased from a nearby vendor. Marcus had been planning this trip to London for months. His travel blog, Wandering Marcus, had gained a decent following, and he was determined to create content that would set him apart from other travel influencers. He'd already visited the Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, and taken countless photos of red telephone boxes. But today was special. Today he would capture the famous British Royal Guards in all their stoic glory. The crowd thickened as more tourists arrived, cameras and phones at the ready. Children perched on their parents' shoulders, elderly couples held hands while consulting guidebooks, and tour groups clustered around guides holding colorful umbrellas. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Marcus positioned himself near the front of the barrier, his expensive camera hanging around his neck. He took another sip of his tea and grimaced slightly. It wasn't quite what he'd expected from authentic British tea, but he'd paid £5 for it, so he was determined to finish it. As the ceremony began, the royal guards emerged in their iconic red tunics and tall black bearskin hats. Their faces remained expressionless as they marched in perfect synchronization, their polished boots clicking against the pavement in rhythmic precision. The crowd fell into a hushed reverence, broken only by the soft clicks of cameras and whispered translations from tour guides. Marcus raised his camera, adjusting the zoom to capture the perfect shot. But as he moved, someone behind him bumped into his elbow, causing him to stumble forward slightly. His grip on the teacup loosened, and before he could react, the lukewarm liquid splashed forward in an arc. Time seemed to slow as the tea flew through the air, landing squarely on the pristine red tunic of Guard James Wellington, a 24-year-old soldier who had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 2 years. The brown liquid stained the immaculate fabric, creating an ugly blotch across the chest area of his ceremonial uniform. The crowd gasped collectively. Phones immediately turned from the ceremony to focus on the unfolding drama. Marcus stood frozen, his empty cup still in his hand, his face turning pale as he realized what had just happened. Guard Wellington felt the cold liquid seep through his tunic, but maintained his rigid posture. Years of training had prepared him for distractions, but this was unprecedented. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly and his hands clenched slightly around his rifle, but he continued to stare straight ahead, his face remaining a mask of professional composure. The other guards continued their ceremony as if nothing had happened, but Marcus could sense the tension in the air. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Some tourists looked horrified, others seemed excited by the unexpected drama, and a few were already posting videos to social media. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I'm so sorry," he said, stepping forward toward the barrier. "It was an accident. Someone pushed me and I—" A stern-looking officer in dress uniform approached quickly, his expression thunderous. "Step back immediately, sir," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military service. "Do not approach the guard." Marcus retreated, his hands shaking as he tried to explain. "Please, I need to apologize. It was completely accidental. I would never disrespect—" "Sir, you need to come with me," the officer interrupted, gesturing toward a side entrance. "Now." The crowd watched in fascination as Marcus was escorted away from the ceremony area. His camera bounced against his chest as he walked, and he could hear the murmur of voices growing louder behind him. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Typical American tourist," while another voice called out, "He should be arrested." Guard Wellington remained at his post throughout the remainder of the ceremony, the tea stain dark and obvious against his red tunic. His training kept him focused, but inside, he was processing what had just occurred. This uniform was more than just clothing. It represented centuries of tradition, honor, and service to the crown. The weight of that tradition felt heavier than ever as he maintained his vigilant stance. In the small security office where Marcus had been taken, he sat across from Sergeant Major Patricia Hayes, a woman whose steely gaze made him feel like a schoolchild, called to the principal's office. The walls were lined with photographs of the royal family and various ceremonial occasions, making Marcus acutely aware of the gravity of his situation. "Mr. Chen," Sergeant Major Hayes began, consulting a notepad. "Can you explain exactly what happened out there?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair, still processing the surreal situation. "I was taking photos of the ceremony. Someone behind me bumped into me and I lost my grip on my teacup. I never intended for this to happen. I have the utmost respect for your traditions and your guards. Regardless of your intentions, Mr. Chen, you've disrupted a centuries-old ceremony and damaged crown property," she replied coldly. "That uniform represents more than fabric and thread. It represents the honor and dignity of the British monarchy." Outside, the ceremony had concluded, but the crowd lingered, many still recording videos and sharing their accounts of the incident on social media. The story was already beginning to spread beyond the palace gates, with hashtags like #Teagate and Royal Guard disrespect starting to trend. Marcus sat in the security office, watching through the small window as tourists continued to point and discuss the incident. He realized that his dream of creating memorable travel content had come true, but not in the way he'd ever imagined. His hands trembled slightly as he thought about the potential consequences of his accidental action. The gravity of the situation was only beginning to sink in, and Marcus had no idea that this single moment would change not only his life but also ignite a debate about respect, tradition, and the treatment of those who serve in ceremonial roles. Within minutes of the incident, the first video appeared on TikTok. Sarah Mitchell, a 19-year-old university student from Manchester, had been recording the ceremony when Marcus spilled his tea. Her shaky footage captured the entire sequence, the tea arcing through the air, splashing across the guard's pristine uniform, and the tourists' horrified reaction. "You won't believe what just happened at Buckingham Palace," Sarah whispered into her phone as she uploaded the video. "Some tourist just threw tea at a royal guard. This is absolutely mental." The video gained traction immediately. Within an hour, it had received thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Most were expressions of outrage and disbelief. British users were particularly incensed, viewing the incident as a direct assault on their national pride and traditions. Meanwhile, Marcus remained in the security office, completely unaware of the digital storm brewing outside. Sergeant Major Hayes had stepped out to consult with her superiors, leaving him alone with his thoughts and growing anxiety. Through the small window, he could see tourists still gathered outside, many pointing in the direction of where the incident had occurred. Guard Wellington had been relieved from his post and escorted to the changing rooms beneath the palace. For the first time since the incident, he allowed his rigid composure to crack slightly. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, the tea stain a glaring blemish on his otherwise immaculate appearance. His fellow guards gathered around him, offering support and sharing their own stories of unusual incidents during ceremonies. "Remember when that pigeon landed on Thompson's hat during the Queen's birthday parade?" one of them said, trying to lighten the mood. "Or when that child started crying and wouldn't stop during the Easter ceremony?" But Wellington knew this was different. The tea stain represented something more than just an accident. In the age of social media, every moment was recorded, every mistake amplified. He could already imagine the headlines and the inevitable jokes at his expense. Back in California, Marcus's girlfriend Emma was getting ready for work when her phone started buzzing with notifications. She opened Twitter to find dozens of tagged posts featuring her boyfriend's name and face. The video had been shared across multiple platforms and news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. "Oh my God, Marcus," she whispered to herself, watching the footage replay on her screen. She immediately tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The time difference meant it was afternoon in London, and she had no way of knowing his current situation. At the BBC newsroom in London, junior reporter David Thompson was monitoring social media trends when the Royal Guard incident caught his attention. He watched the video several times, noting the genuine distress on the tourist's face and the professional composure of the guard. This wasn't just a social media moment. It was a story that touched on themes of cultural respect, tradition, and the modern challenges facing ceremonial institutions. "I think we should cover this," David told his editor, pulling up the video on the newsroom's main screen. "It's already trending, and there's something deeper here about how we treat our ceremonial traditions in the digital age." His editor, Maria Santos, studied the footage carefully. "Get in touch with the Palace press office, see if they'll make a statement, and try to find out more about this tourist. What's his background? Was it really an accident?" Meanwhile, Guard Wellington's younger sister Amy was at work at a marketing firm in Leeds when her colleague showed her the viral video. Her heart sank as she recognized her brother's distinctive stance and the unit he served with. "That's my brother," she said quietly, causing her colleague to look at her with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Really? Is he okay?" "I can't imagine how embarrassing this must be for him," her colleague replied. Amy felt a surge of protectiveness toward her brother. She knew how seriously he took his duty, how much pride he had in wearing the uniform. This incident would devastate him, regardless of whether it was accidental or not. Back at the palace, Marcus was finally allowed to make a phone call. His hand shook as he dialed his girlfriend's number, relief flooding through him when she answered immediately. "Marcus, are you okay? I've been trying to reach you for hours. The whole internet is going crazy over what happened," Emma said, her voice filled with concern and barely contained panic. "Emma, I'm in so much trouble," Marcus replied, his voice cracking slightly. "It was an accident, I swear. Someone bumped into me and the tea just flew out of my hands. I would never deliberately disrespect anyone like that. I know, baby. I know you wouldn't. But the videos are everywhere and people are not happy. Some of the comments are really nasty. They're calling for you to be banned from the UK and worse." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had built his travel blog on the foundation of respectful cultural exploration. The idea that he might be perceived as an ugly American tourist who deliberately disrespected British traditions was his worst nightmare come true. Sergeant Major Hayes returned to the office with several documents in hand. Her expression had softened slightly, but her tone remained professional. "Mr. Chen, we've reviewed the security footage from multiple angles. It's clear that the incident was accidental, caused by crowd movement behind you." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you. I was so worried that people would think I did it on purpose. However," she continued, "the incident has already gained significant media attention. We're going to need you to remain here while we determine the appropriate course of action. This is now a public relations situation as much as a security one." Outside the palace gates, the crowd of tourists had been replaced by a smaller but more focused group of people. Some held signs reading "Respect our guards" and "Tourist go home." Others were clearly reporters, with professional cameras and microphones, hoping to catch any officials entering or leaving the palace grounds. The incident was beginning to take on a life of its own, growing beyond a simple accident into a symbol of broader cultural tensions. British social media users were sharing stories of disrespectful tourist behavior, while others defended Marcus, pointing out that accidents happen and his distress appeared genuine. Guard Wellington, now changed into casual clothes, sat in the guard's common room reading the messages of support from his family and friends. But he also saw the memes, the jokes, and the less supportive comments questioning his professionalism or suggesting that modern guards weren't as disciplined as their predecessors. The weight of centuries of tradition felt heavier than ever on his shoulders. He wondered if he would ever be able to return to ceremonial duties without being remembered as the guard who got tea thrown on him. The digital age had turned a moment of professional challenge into a permanent record of perceived humiliation. As evening approached in London, both Marcus and Wellington found themselves at the center of a story that neither had wanted to be part of. The accident that had lasted mere seconds was now rippling outward, affecting families, friends, and strangers across the globe who felt compelled to take sides in a situation that defied simple categorization. By the following morning, the story had exploded across international media. The Daily Mail ran with the headline, "American Tourists' Tea Assault on Queen's Guard Sparks Outrage," while The Guardian took a more measured approach with "Accidental Spill at Palace Raises Questions About Tourist Behavior and Social Media Justice." Marcus woke up in his hotel room after a sleepless night, having been released from palace custody, with a stern warning and a request to remain available for potential follow-up questions. His phone had died sometime during the night from the constant stream of notifications, and when he plugged it in, he watched in horror as hundreds of messages flooded his screen. His travel blog, which had modest but loyal following of 30,000 subscribers, had gained over 200,000 new followers overnight. But the comments section had become a battlefield. Some people defended him, sharing their own stories of travel mishaps and accidents, while others called for him to be banned from the UK permanently. The most painful messages came from other travel bloggers and content creators who distanced themselves from his actions. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that gives travel influencers a bad reputation," wrote Jessica Martinez, a popular travel blogger with over 1 million followers. "We need to be ambassadors of respect and cultural sensitivity, not examples of American ignorance abroad." Marcus sat on the edge of his hotel bed, reading message after message, feeling more isolated than ever. His carefully built reputation as a respectful traveler was crumbling before his eyes, all because of a few seconds of unfortunate timing. Meanwhile, Guard Wellington arrived at the barracks early, hoping to avoid the attention of his fellow soldiers. But as he entered the common room, conversation stopped and he felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. Some of his colleagues offered supportive nods, while others seemed to study him with curiosity, as if he had become some sort of celebrity. "Wellington," called out Sergeant Collins, his immediate superior. "Report to my office, please." As Wellington walked through the corridors, he passed several framed photographs of past ceremonial occasions. Each image represented the dignity and solemnity that the guards were expected to maintain. He wondered if yesterday's incident would forever taint his service record. In Sergeant Collins's office, the older man gestured for Wellington to sit down. The walls were covered with commendations and photographs spanning a 30-year military career, and the sergeant's expression was thoughtful rather than disciplinary. "James," he began, using Wellington's first name, which immediately put the younger soldier at ease. "I've been in this job for 3 decades, and I've seen guards deal with everything from fainting tourists to bird attacks to protesters. Yesterday's incident was unusual, but your response was exemplary." Wellington felt a mixture of relief and confusion. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand." "The video makes it look like I just stood there while someone disrespected the uniform." "That's exactly what you were supposed to do," Sergeant Collins replied firmly. "Your job is to maintain dignity and composure regardless of circumstances. The moment you would have reacted with anger or broken protocol would have been the moment you truly failed in your duty." The sergeant pulled up the viral video on his computer, replaying it several times. "Look at your posture, your expression, your discipline. Even after being soaked with tea, you maintained your post and your professionalism. That's not weakness, James. That's the highest form of strength." Across London, the BBC newsroom was in full investigation mode. Reporter David Thompson had spent the morning interviewing tourism experts, etiquette specialists, and former royal guards to provide context for the story. What had started as a simple social media incident was evolving into a broader discussion about cultural respect and the pressures faced by ceremonial institutions in the modern world. "The interesting thing," explained Dr. Sarah Whitman, a cultural anthropologist from Cambridge University, during a phone interview, "is how this incident reflects our changing relationship with tradition and authority. 50 years ago, this would have been a private embarrassment handled quietly. Today it becomes a global conversation within hours." David nodded, taking notes as she continued. "We're seeing 2 narratives emerge. One focuses on the American tourists' perceived disrespect, playing into existing tensions about over-tourism and cultural sensitivity. The other examines the guards' professional response and questions whether we're putting too much pressure on individuals to be perfect representatives of national identity." In California, Marcus's parents had seen the news coverage and were desperately trying to reach their son. His mother, Linda Chen, a retired schoolteacher, was particularly distressed by some of the more vicious comments she'd read online. "People are calling him all sorts of terrible names," she told her husband Robert. "They're saying he should be ashamed to be American, that he's a disgrace. This isn't the son we raised." Robert, a pragmatic engineer, was analyzing the situation more systematically. "The video clearly shows it was an accident. Anyone with eyes can see that. But people don't want facts when they're angry. They want someone to blame." Back in London, Marcus decided to leave his hotel room for the first time since the incident. He needed food and fresh air, and he couldn't hide forever. But as he walked through the streets of Kensington, he noticed people looking at him with recognition. His face had been plastered across news websites and social media platforms, making him instantly recognizable to anyone who had followed the story. At a small cafe, he overheard 2 women discussing the incident. "I don't care if it was an accident," one of them said. "Americans come here and act like they own the place. They're loud, they're disrespectful, and they don't understand our culture." "But the poor guard," the other replied, standing there all professional while this tourist made a mess of his uniform. He showed real class, that one. Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions. He was grateful that people recognized Wellington's professionalism, but the characterization of himself as a stereotypical ugly American stung deeply. He had spent years trying to be exactly the opposite kind of traveler. At the palace, Wellington was preparing for another ceremonial duty, this time with extra attention to his appearance and mental preparation. The tea-stained uniform had been sent for professional cleaning, and he would be wearing a backup today. But he knew that every tourist with a camera would be looking for him, hoping to capture another moment for their social media feeds. His sister Amy had driven down from Leeds to offer moral support, waiting for him at a pub near the barracks after his shift. When he arrived, still in uniform, several patrons recognized him and offered nods of respect and approval. "You've become something of a folk hero," Amy said, scrolling through her phone. "Look at these comments. That guard showed what British discipline really means. True professional under pressure. This is why our royal guards are respected worldwide." Wellington smiled for the first time since the incident. "It's strange, isn't it? I spent my whole career hoping to serve with distinction, and it turns out the most distinguished thing I ever did was get tea spilled on me and not react." They laughed together, but both siblings understood that the incident had changed something fundamental. Wellington was no longer just another face in the ceremonial rotation. He had become a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. Meanwhile, Marcus was discovering that infamy brought its own bizarre opportunities. His phone rang with calls from talk show producers, documentary filmmakers, and even a publisher interested in a book about his experience. The irony wasn't lost on him that the worst moment of his travel career might also become the most profitable. But financial opportunity felt hollow when measured against the damage to his reputation and the pain he'd caused others. He thought about Wellington, wondering if the guard's life had been similarly disrupted by the incident, and feeling a deep desire to somehow make amends for the chaos that had erupted from a single moment of clumsiness. The controversy reached a new level when Member of Parliament Richard Ashworth raised the issue during Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons. Standing at the dispatch box, he addressed the Prime Minister directly. "Will the Prime Minister join me in condemning the disgraceful behavior of tourists who show such blatant disrespect for our cherished institutions and the brave men and women who serve in our ceremonial guard?" The Prime Minister, caught somewhat off guard by the question, responded diplomatically. "While I understand the honorable gentleman's concerns about respecting our traditions, I believe we should be careful not to rush to judgment about individual incidents. Our royal guards serve with distinction and professionalism, as demonstrated by the exemplary conduct of the guard in question." This parliamentary exchange was immediately picked up by international news outlets, transforming what had been a viral social media story into a legitimate diplomatic talking point. The American embassy in London found themselves fielding inquiries from both British and American media about the incident and the broader relationship between the two nations. Ambassador Patricia Williams, a career diplomat with decades of experience, recognized the delicate nature of the situation. In a carefully worded statement, she said, "Accidents happen when millions of people visit each other's countries every year. What matters is how we respond to these situations, and we commend the professionalism shown by the British Royal Guard while also acknowledging that the American citizen involved has expressed genuine remorse for an unintended incident." The statement was an attempt to diffuse tensions, but it had mixed results. Some British commentators praised the diplomatic response, while others felt it was insufficient acknowledgement of the perceived insult to British traditions. Marcus, watching the parliamentary debate from his hotel room, felt the surreal weight of seeing his accidental action discussed by world leaders. He had gone from being an unknown travel blogger to being a minor international incident in less than 48 hours. His phone rang again, this time with a call from his literary agent, someone he'd worked with on a previous travel guidebook that had sold modestly. "Marcus, I know this is a difficult time, but I'm getting serious interest from publishers. People want your story. This could be the break you've been waiting for." "The break I've been waiting for?" Marcus replied, incredulous. "Janet, my reputation is in ruins. Half the internet thinks I'm some kind of cultural vandal. The other half thinks I'm a symbol of everything wrong with American tourists." "Exactly. Janet said with the enthusiasm of someone who understood the publishing industry. Controversy sells. People are invested in your story now. You could write about cultural understanding, travel etiquette, the power of social media to transform incidents into international news. This is bigger than travel blogging now. Marcus felt torn between the practical need to salvage something from this disaster and his genuine remorse about the situation. The idea of profiting from what he saw as his failure felt morally complicated. Meanwhile, Wellington was experiencing his own version of unwanted fame. The palace had received dozens of interview requests from media outlets wanting to speak with the guard who showed British dignity under pressure. Most were declined by the palace press office, but the attention was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. During his lunch break, Wellington met with his girlfriend Sarah, a nurse who worked at a nearby hospital. She had been following the story with a mixture of pride and concern for how it was affecting him. "The entire hospital is talking about it," she told him over coffee. "Most people are saying how proud they are of how you handled it. But I can see it's bothering you more than you're letting on." Wellington stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "It's not that I'm upset about people praising my professionalism. I trained for years to maintain composure under pressure. But this feels different. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just stood there and did my job." "Why is that being treated as heroic?" Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "Because in a world where everyone expects immediate reactions and dramatic responses, doing your job with quiet dignity actually is extraordinary. People need to see that kind of steadiness." Their conversation was interrupted when Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it and her expression changed. "James, you need to see this." She showed him a new video that was trending on social media. It was a compilation of royal guards throughout history, maintaining their composure during various incidents. Guards standing firm during thunderstorms, ignoring tourists trying to get reactions, and maintaining protocol during protests and demonstrations. The video, titled "The Unbreakable Spirit of Britain's Royal Guards," had been created by a British military history enthusiast and featured Wellington's incident as the culmination of centuries of professional tradition. The narrator spoke over dramatic music. From the battlefields of Waterloo to the gates of Buckingham Palace, Britain's guardsmen have always stood firm in the face of adversity. "I'm not sure if this makes it better or worse," Wellington said, watching himself become part of a narrative much larger than his individual experience. Back in his hotel room, Marcus was working on a blog post that he hoped would help clarify his perspective and express his genuine remorse. He had started and deleted dozens of drafts, struggling to find words that felt authentic without seeming self-serving. His girlfriend Emma called from California, where it was early morning. "How are you holding up, baby?" "I've been reading everything I can find about the story. I don't know, Em. Part of me wants to just apologize publicly and hope it goes away. But another part of me is wondering if I should try to use this attention to talk about something meaningful. Cultural respect, the humanity of people in ceremonial roles, something positive." "What does your gut tell you?" Emma asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "My gut tells me I should try to meet the guard face to face. Apologize properly, not through the media or social media, but as one person to another. Maybe that's naive, but it feels like the right thing to do." Meanwhile, in the palace communications office, Press Secretary Michael Harrison was dealing with the ongoing media interest in the story. He had fielded calls from news outlets in 12 different countries, all wanting statements, interviews, or background information about both the incident and the broader protocols surrounding Royal Guard duties. "The interesting thing," he told his deputy, "is how this story has evolved. It started as potential criticism of tourist behavior, but it's become a celebration of British military professionalism. The Guard's response has actually enhanced the reputation of the institution, rather than damaging it." His deputy, Margaret Foster, had been monitoring social media trends throughout the day. "The sentiment is definitely shifting. The hashtags are changing from criticism of the tourist to praise for the Guard. There's even a petition circulating calling for him to receive some kind of commendation for exemplary service." This development represented a turning point in the story. What had begun as a potential scandal was transforming into a positive narrative about duty, professionalism, and the values that the Royal Guards represented. But for both Marcus and Wellington, the individuals at the center of the story, this shift in public opinion brought its own complications. They remained connected by the incident that had thrust them both into the spotlight, yet they had never actually met or spoken to each other. The viral nature of their shared moment had created a strange intimacy between strangers, where millions of people felt they knew both men based on a few seconds of video footage, while the two principals remained mysteries to each other. As the fourth day since the incident drew to a close, both men found themselves contemplating how a single moment could reshape not just their own lives, but become part of a larger conversation about tradition, respect, and human dignity in the modern world. On the fifth day after the incident, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of hiding in his hotel room or catching the next flight back to California, he walked directly to the main gates of Buckingham Palace and asked to speak with someone in authority about arranging a meeting with the guard he had accidentally splashed with tea. The request was so unusual that it took nearly an hour for palace security to figure out how to handle it. Marcus waited patiently outside the gates, drawing curious looks from passing tourists, some of whom recognized him from the viral videos. A few asked for selfies, which he politely declined, feeling it would be inappropriate given the circumstances. Eventually, he was escorted to the same security office where he had been questioned days earlier. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. Sergeant Major Hayes greeted him with something approaching warmth, though her professional demeanor remained intact. "Mr. Chen, this is a highly unusual request," she said, settling into her chair across from him. "Our guards don't typically engage in personal meetings with members of the public, and certainly not under circumstances like these." Marcus had rehearsed what he wanted to say during his walk to the palace. "I understand that, and I respect your protocols completely, but this whole situation has gotten so far beyond what actually happened. I just want the chance to apologize properly, person to person, not through media statements or social media posts." Sergeant Major Hayes studied him carefully. She had been dealing with media requests and public pressure for days, but this was the first time someone involved in the incident had asked for something other than publicity or damage control. "The guard in question has shown remarkable professionalism throughout this ordeal," she said. "He's become something of a symbol of our values and traditions. Are you prepared for the possibility that he might not want to meet with you?" "Of course," Marcus replied. "If he doesn't want to see me, I completely understand. I just wanted to make the offer. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do." Meanwhile, Wellington was in the palace barracks when Sergeant Collins approached him with the unusual request. His first reaction was surprise, followed by curiosity. He had wondered about the American tourist, whether he was genuinely remorseful or simply trying to manage the public relations fallout from the incident. "What do you think, James?" Sergeant Collins asked. "You're under no obligation to meet with him, but given the amount of public attention this has received, there might be value in showing that our institution can handle these situations with grace and dignity." Wellington considered the proposal carefully. His sister Amy had been encouraging him to take control of his own narrative, rather than letting others define his experience. Perhaps meeting with Marcus would provide some closure for both of them. "I'll meet with him," Wellington decided, "but not as a media opportunity. If we're going to do this, it should be private, away from cameras and publicity." The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon in a small conference room within the palace complex. Both men arrived punctually, though each was nervous for different reasons. Marcus worried that Wellington might be angry or resentful, while Wellington was concerned about how to maintain his professional dignity while engaging in such an unconventional situation. When they first saw each other face to face, both men fell silent for a moment. Here was the person who had shared their most public moment, yet they were complete strangers. Marcus broke the silence first. "I want you to know that I am deeply, genuinely sorry for what happened. I know it was an accident, and I know you know it was an accident, but that doesn't change the fact that I disrupted something important and potentially embarrassed you in front of the world." Wellington, still in his dress uniform for the ceremonial duties he had performed earlier, maintained his formal posture, but his expression was thoughtful rather than stern. "I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Chen. In all honesty, I was more concerned about how the incident would be perceived by others than about the actual tea stain." They talked for nearly an hour, and gradually the formal atmosphere relaxed. Marcus learned that Wellington had joined the guards after serving in Afghanistan, seeking a way to continue serving his country in peacetime. Wellington discovered that Marcus had built his travel career specifically around promoting cultural understanding and respectful tourism. "The irony isn't lost on me," Marcus said with a rueful smile, "that someone who has spent years advocating for respectful travel became the poster child for ugly American tourist behavior. And I became famous for doing exactly what I was trained to do. Stand still and maintain composure," Wellington replied. Strange how the world works sometimes. Their conversation revealed something that the viral videos and media coverage had missed. Both men were thoughtful, decent people who had been caught up in circumstances beyond their control. The incident that had made them enemies in the public imagination had actually connected them as fellow human beings, dealing with unexpected fame and scrutiny. Sergeant Major Hayes observed the meeting from a distance, noting how both men seemed to relax as they talked. This was exactly the kind of outcome she had hoped for. A demonstration that dignity and understanding could prevail over conflict and misunderstanding. As their meeting concluded, Wellington made an unexpected suggestion. "Would you like to see the uniform that was stained? It's been cleaned now, but I thought you might want to understand what it represents." Marcus was surprised by the offer, but accepted immediately. Wellington led him through corridors lined with portraits of monarchs and military heroes, explaining the history and significance of the royal guards as they walked. They stopped at a display case containing various ceremonial uniforms from different periods in British history. "This isn't just clothing," Wellington explained, gesturing to a pristine red tunic similar to the one he wore. "Each thread represents centuries of tradition, sacrifice, and service. When someone wears this uniform, they become part of something much larger than themselves." Marcus studied the uniform with new understanding. "I had no idea about the weight of history behind it. That makes what happened feel even worse, honestly. But it also makes my response more meaningful," Wellington said quietly. "Standing firm when faced with the unexpected isn't just about personal discipline. It's about honoring everyone who wore this uniform before me, and everyone who will wear it after." Their conversation was interrupted when Sergeant Major Hayes approached with news that would change everything. "Gentlemen, I've just received word that the Palace press office has been contacted by several major news outlets. Someone leaked information about your meeting today." Both men felt their hearts sink. What had been intended as a private moment of reconciliation was about to become another public spectacle. Marcus immediately felt guilty, wondering if his request for the meeting had somehow caused this new invasion of privacy. "I want you both to know," Sergeant Major Hayes continued, "that the leak didn't come from anyone in our organization. But we need to decide how to handle the inevitable questions that will follow." Wellington and Marcus looked at each other, recognizing that their brief escape from public scrutiny was about to end, but something had changed during their hour together. They were no longer strangers connected only by an embarrassing accident. They had become against all odds allies in navigating an extraordinary situation. "Whatever happens next," Marcus said, "I want people to know that this man handled an impossible situation with more grace and dignity than I could have imagined. He's exactly the kind of person who should be representing your country's values." Wellington nodded appreciatively. "And I want people to understand that accidents happen to good people. Mr. Chen's character isn't defined by one moment of clumsiness, but by how he's handled himself since then." As they prepared to face the renewed media attention, both men realized that their story was evolving once again. What had begun as a viral moment of supposed cultural conflict was becoming something else entirely. A demonstration of how understanding and respect could bridge divides and turn strangers into supporters. The meeting had lasted only an hour, but it had fundamentally changed how both men viewed their shared experience. They were no longer victim and perpetrator, but two people who had found common ground in the most unlikely circumstances. The news of the private meeting between Marcus and Wellington broke just as the evening news cycles were beginning across Europe and America. Within hours, the story had evolved from tourist meets guard after tea incident to something far more significant. Enemies become allies when respect transcends conflict. The palace, recognizing that they could no longer control the narrative through silence, decided to release a joint statement from both men. It was carefully crafted but reflected the genuine understanding they had reached during their private conversation. What began as an unfortunate accident has become an opportunity to demonstrate that dignity, respect, and understanding can bridge any divide. The statement read, "We hope our experience shows that quick judgments based on brief moments rarely capture the full truth of any situation." The response was immediate and largely positive. Social media users who had spent days taking sides in the supposed conflict found themselves confronted with a narrative that defied simple categorization. The two men who were supposed to represent opposing sides of cultural tension had instead become symbols of reconciliation. Marcus returned to his hotel that evening to find his phone buzzing with interview requests from major television networks. But the tone of these requests was different from the sensationalistic approach of earlier coverage. Producers were interested in the story of understanding and forgiveness rather than conflict and controversy. He accepted an invitation to appear on BBC Breakfast the following morning, but only on the condition that Wellington would join him if possible. The idea of telling their story together felt important to both men. Wellington, meanwhile, was dealing with a different kind of media attention. Military publications wanted to feature his story as an example of modern professionalism, while tourism organizations saw an opportunity to promote respectful travel. The Palace Communications Office was carefully managing these requests, ensuring that any appearances would enhance rather than diminish the dignity of his position. The BBC breakfast interview took place in a neutral location, with both men appearing together for the first time on camera since their accidental encounter. The interviewer, veteran journalist Amanda Foster, had prepared thoughtful questions that went beyond the surface drama of the incident. "Marcus, when you woke up that morning, did you ever imagine that spilling tea would lead to international headlines?" she asked. Marcus smiled ruefully. "Never in my wildest dreams. I thought I was just documenting a traditional British ceremony for my travel blog. I certainly never intended to become part of the story myself." "And James," she continued, turning to Wellington, "how did it feel to become an internet sensation for simply doing your job?" "It was surreal," Wellington admitted. "Military training prepares you for many things, but not for millions of people analyzing your every movement. What got me through it was remembering that I wasn't representing just myself, but centuries of tradition and all the guardsmen who came before me." The most powerful moment of the interview came when Amanda asked them about their private meeting. Both men spoke about how their conversation had changed their perspectives on the incident, and on each other meeting, "James helped me understand that this wasn't just about my embarrassment, or even about cultural sensitivity," Marcus explained. "It was about recognizing the human being behind the uniform, someone who takes his responsibilities seriously and deserves respect for his service." Wellington nodded. "And meeting Marcus reminded me that we're all capable of making mistakes, but what matters is how we respond to them. His willingness to seek me out and apologize personally showed real character." The interview was watched by millions of people across the UK and was later picked up by international news networks. The comment sections, which had been battlegrounds of cultural criticism just days earlier, filled with messages of appreciation for both men's maturity and grace. Dr. Sarah Whitman, the cultural anthropologist who had been following the story, was invited to provide commentary on the BBC's evening news program. "What we've witnessed is quite remarkable," she said. "In an age of social media outrage and instant judgment, these two individuals have shown us a different way forward. They've demonstrated that understanding and forgiveness are possible, even when the whole world is watching." The story's resolution had broader implications beyond the personal experiences of Marcus and Wellington. Tourism boards in London reported an uptick in inquiries from American visitors who specifically mentioned wanting to visit the palace and meet the guards respectfully. The incident had accidentally become a teaching moment about cultural sensitivity and mutual respect. Marcus decided to extend his stay in London for another week, using the time to create content about respectful tourism and cultural understanding. His blog post about the incident and its aftermath became his most read piece ever, attracting readers who were interested in the broader lessons rather than just the viral moment. Wellington returned to his regular duties, but found that his experience had given him a new perspective on his role. He began participating in educational programs that the palace organized for school groups, helping young people understand the history and significance of the Royal Guards. 6 months later, Marcus and Wellington maintained contact through social media and occasional messages. Marcus had written a book about his experience, donating a portion of the proceeds to military charities. Wellington had been promoted and was training new recruits, using his story as an example of how to maintain professionalism under pressure. The incident that could have become a symbol of cultural division had instead become a reminder of human decency and the possibility of understanding across differences. Both men had learned that sometimes the most important moments in life come from the most unexpected circumstances. In the end, the story of the tourist who spilled tea on a royal guard became something much more significant, a testament to the power of taking responsibility for one's actions, showing grace under pressure, and choosing understanding over judgment. It proved that even in an age of viral outrage and instant condemnation, dignity and respect could still prevail. The tea stain had been washed away within hours, but the lessons learned from that brief moment of human connection continued to resonate long after the news cameras had moved on to other stories.